start earlier. Don't think about it more and more and wonder when you're going to do it. If you have the idea and you have the passion to do it, don't wait. Start today. Start right now. Make that first phone call. Get your business license. Get set up. Name your company. Start moving. Don't waste time, because what you'll find is once you get into this, you never have enough time.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups and 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, feel free to go to strategymeeting.com. We're always here to help. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, Roger Tilton. And give you a quick introduction to Roger. So didn't realize till a few years ago that life had a theme since really started in high school. When in high school, it was always trying to get access to something that people didn't want to have or didn't want to have access to. Nothing bad, of course, but just and he'll expound on that a little bit. But in high school, his parents got divorced. Mom had 3 kids, was a single mom, grew up in a meager lifestyle. Dad, on the opposite hand, had a nice lifestyle. So kind of saw both sides of that. After graduated, went to University of Washington, got a degree, graduated at not the best time in the 1980s with the Depression, but still found a job as a journalist, or did that for a period of time. And then his wife at the time told him that there was opportunities to make more money than a journalist, because journalists oftentimes don't make as much as you would think. So went in to be a stockbroker, did that for 20 years, and then started his own private equity firm. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Roger.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
So I gave a very quick run through of a much longer journey. So take us back in time a bit to, how you, first of all, a bit of the theme of your life that started in high school and kind of how things got going from there. And let's talk about your journey from there.
All right. Well, when we're growing up, we think that our situation is normal, that this is how everybody grows up. So we don't really see ourselves as any different. But you got it right. I called it going from poverty to posh in a weekend, in a 45-minute car ride. When my parents were divorced, my mom was single, like you said. I had 2 brothers, and we lived in what I call the Barrio, part ghetto, part barrio in San Jose. But on the weekends, we'd go stay at this high-rise Twin Peaks condo overlooking San Francisco Bay, and Oakland. So I didn't realize it, but I had one foot in each bucket basically since the time I was a little kid. When I got to high school, I ran for class president as a freshman, because from what I had heard, the freshman class never got anything out of the student council. So I thought, hey, I'll give you access to that. I didn't know the word access back then, but it became a theme of my life. And when I left the brokerage firm for the last time in 2016, I realized that my whole life had been providing access to people to something they didn't have access to, whether it was politics in high school, or I became a reporter. I would go out and find the information so people would have it. So they would have access to the news, the newsmakers, the news conferences. I would report that back to them. So then the whole money thing is like, oh yeah, you can't make a living doing that.
Let's jump back, just because you jumped over a whole bunch of the story, which I think is interesting. So you went to high school, kind of figured that out, and you kind of saw both sides of the spectrum, with the rich dad, poor mom type of thing, instead of rich dad, poor dad, those type of things. But you got to see both things within a short distance time. Went to University of Washington, but then you were coming out during kind of the Depression in the 1980s, and I think that's what you kind of said, hey, I was trying to figure out what I want to do. Journalist opportunity came available, and that's how you started out after graduation? Or kind of how did you start out in journalism?
Yeah, I started out in journalism when I went to a community college in Cupertino, California. I went to De Anza College, and on the first day I went into the newspaper office, and they needed bodies, and I was sports editor by the end of day 1, editor-in-chief 2.5 months later, and I was also a reporter, photographer, typesetter. I did it all. And then when I transferred to the University of Washington, I worked on the UW dailies, and then from there I ended up at a TV station doing writing and producing newscasts.
No, that sounds like a fun opportunity and something that kind of interesting as you're coming out of college. Now you did that. How long did you do the journalism position or journalism job?
I spent a total of 10 years as a journalist. The last 5 with the TV station, the TV news.
So
that's when And that's when I switched over to Merrill Lynch. And it was really all about money. And isn't Wall Street really all about money? And that's kind of what I realized. You know, after 27 years being a financial advisor, I realized that that really wasn't what I wanted to do. I mean, I enjoyed helping people, giving them access to investments, right? Access to capitalism. But it really doesn't work that way. The rich get richer and the poor and the middle class get poorer.
No, and that definitely makes sense. And so, you get into journalism. It sounds like it would be a fun or exciting job, but after a period of time, you're saying, "Hey, it's more difficult to support myself off this wage. I'm going to look for something." So I said, "Okay, I'll go into more of the investment, go into Wall Street. They're about money, and I can make a good wage and income." When you made that transition, did you have any background or experience, or know how to get into it, or how did you? Because it seems like a bit of a jump from journalism to more of a Wall Street and investing in venture capital and angel investor and finances and all that. So how did you kind of make that transition or that leap?
Well, this is where the story gets good, Devin. My mother, as I told you, had 3 sons, single, part-time jobs, and she went to college at night. She ended up getting her college degree in her 30s and then got hired at E.F. Hutton in the mid-1970s as a stockbroker. So I had a part-time job there for a few months in 1979, and I thought, oh, I could do that. But I was a journalist. I was writing. I was getting published. I didn't want to do that. But it was in the back of my mind. And so eventually, many years later, I thought, oh, I could do that. And so I went about getting hired without ever telling my mother that I was quitting journalism. I just called her one day and said, hey, Mom, I do what you do now. I work at Merrill Lynch.
No, and it makes sense. So now you do that for a period of time and you say, okay, I'm going to work at Merrill Lynch. I'm going to do finances. Now, the one question I had was it as simple as simply your wife said, hey, this is going to be, we need to make more money, or we need to figure out a better income to support the family. Was that as simple as the decision was, or was there anything more involved, or anything that kind of more that went into that?
Well, it was a little bit more involved. In TV news, especially, you bump into a ceiling. I was working in the Seattle market. I think at the time it was the 14th largest television market. And it was a destination market. People wanted to move to Seattle so they would take lower pay. For me to get higher pay, I'd have to move to a larger market like New York. And I didn't really want to do that. Plus, I wanted to wear nice looking suits to work every day. And I didn't do that as a journalist. And I thought, yeah, I really want to ingratiate myself into this Wall Street lifestyle.
So now you make that transition, you kind of, start to figure it out. Was it was it as rewarding or enjoyable as, doing all the journalism stuff? Was it fun and exciting, or was it one where, hey, I made a lot of money, I got to wear the nice suits, but I wish I'd go back to journalism? Or kind of, how was that transition for you?
Well, 2 months after I started at Merrill Lynch, I was at the World Series in 1989. It was the 5th consecutive year I had gone to the World Series. Huge baseball fan, right? And there's an earthquake. And I work at Merrill Lynch. I'm not a journalist. And I was so bummed. It's like, oh my God, I want to tell this story, but I couldn't. Yeah, there was a lot of give and take. I liked helping people. I liked giving people access to Wall Street investments, but I really soured on it over the years because Wall Street really does only care about themselves and the 1%ers, and everybody else is just kind of a nuisance. And so what I wanted to do was give access to the 99%ers. Most people don't realize this, but access to capitalism is very limited in this country. And when I say capitalism, I'm talking about generational wealth building capitalism, not capitalism with loan sharks and student loans and refinance and foreclosure. Because look at people in their 20s and 30s today. What is their experience with capitalism? Debt, loans, difficulties making it. I mean, they don't have access to wealth generating capitalism like private equity, like venture capital, like new industries. And that's what I've set out to do with my company, is give people access, give the 99%ers access to the wealth building mechanisms of capitalism, like private equity, like venture capital. And I'm doing it with the legal adult use cannabis trade because it's not regulated by the federal government right now. And if you, as an investor, wanted to get into private equity or venture capital or legal cannabis, you have to be accredited. Accredited means you have $1 million of liquid net worth sitting over there in your bank account or your stock account. and you make $200,000 a year, or
Mhm.
300,000 if you're married. That's 1% of the people. So we're eliminating 99% of the people from access to getting rich.
Mm. No, one question, and we'll definitely dive into that a bit. But before, just backing up a bit. So you worked on Wall Street. It was for 20 plus years. Is that right?
27 years as a registered representative on the NYSE.
So now you do that for 20 plus years. What was a tipping point, or what's what point did you say, hey, I want to do this on my own? I want to go out, start my own firm, give people access to capital they may not have otherwise done, and that type of thing. What gave you that what gave you that motivation, that prompting to do that?
Well, I think it started when I wrote an op-ed that went viral in October of 2008 that said, "Dear Congress, don't bail out Wall Street," because I knew exactly what would happen. I read that article now 13 years later, and exactly what I predicted would happen happened. They took all the money and they gave themselves big bonuses for bailing themselves out. Hey, we saved the company. Yay. So 2008, 2009, the way that Wall Street engineered that financial meltdown, it was disgusting, and nobody paid the price. Not one single person went to jail for that. So that's kind of when I started looking for an out. And then in 2012, when Washington legalized adult use cannabis, and Colorado did too, I thought, okay, there's an industry that's going to become one of the fastest growing industries in the United States, if not the world, in the next decade or two. And now we've seen it. That was 9 years ago that we first legalized adult use cannabis in the United States. 9 years. Now we have 15 states that have legalized, and we're on our way to 50. There's no doubt we're going to get there. And so who's going to make money on the cannabis industry? The rich, fat Wall Street guys again? Probably. But what I want to do is offer access to that industry, that generational wealth building opportunity, to the 99%ers. I'm not going to leave out the 1%ers, but the way that I look at it, Devin, the minimum for the 1%ers is $25,000. The minimum for the 99%ers, $420. Now, the accredited investors still get all that fine due diligence research of a Wall Street analyst. I've been doing it for 30 years now. I've spent the last 5 years tracking the growing legal cannabis trade.
No, that definitely makes sense. So now that kind of brings us to where you're at today. Now, if you're kind of, in doing the investment, helping the other 99%, or those that don't typically have access to it or can invest, when you look at now kind of the next 6 to 12 months, where do you see things headed, or what's the trajectory you guys are on?
It's nothing but up, Devin. This industry, every time you turn around, there's another store opening. I live right on the border with Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire, and there are legal adult use marijuana stores opening all over the state. It's just happening. Maine now is starting to open retail stores. You've got Illinois and Michigan. It's a growing industry. And for anybody who wants to participate, we're here for you. You don't have to have $1 million net worth. You don't have to have a $25,000 minimum. You can have access.
So no, and I think that's cool in the sense that I think that it's an industry that people oftentimes don't know how to get into it, or they get into it and they have to be accredited, or they have to go through a lot of regulations. And so providing access to people in any given industry, I think, is an admirable, if I could say the word, endeavor. So, well, as we kind of now catch up to a bit of your journey and where you're heading a bit in the future, I always have 2 questions I ask at the end of the podcast. So I'll jump to those now for a bit. The first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
Know who you go into business with. Know your partner. Before Access World Group, there was a predecessor company, which I won't name, and I won't name my partner. But get to know your partner, or you can lose everything quickly.
No, and I think that's, it's an interesting, if you getting a partner in business has a lot of overlaps with dating or otherwise you're marrying someone, but people oftentimes you don't take it nearly serious or think about it in the sense that you date, you get to know the person, you have a relationship, you go out a lot and everything else, and yet oftentimes with a partner, you just think, oh, they complement this, or they have this money, or they have this access, and good enough. And, you kind of jump in, but there's a lot that goes into, you're going to be with them a lot, you're going to be working long hours, you're both going to be contributing or hopefully contributing. You're going to have your ups and downs. You'll probably have your fights and whatnot. And so you better make sure as you're doing that the partner you get into bed with is going to be one that you enjoy, and then one that's going to be a good relationship, a business relationship, because otherwise it can certainly have, negative repercussions for the business.
Yeah, I was pretty astute when I figured out what was going on. It was like 6 or 8 months after we started that I thought, this is not working. What did I have access to? 27 years of clientele. I had access to money. What did he have access to? Well, supposedly expertise, but he was just more interested in the money that I brought in. So I started over, and here we are.
No, definitely makes sense, and a good lesson to learn, and one that a lot of entrepreneurs, and when you go into going into a partnership or into business, you learn one way or the other. So
the second question.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, second question I always ask is, if you're talking now to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Start earlier. Don't think about it more and more and wonder when you're going to do it. If you have the idea and you have the passion to do it, don't wait. Start today. Start right now. Make that first phone call. Get your business license. Get set up. Name your company. Start moving. Don't waste time, because what you'll find is once you get into this, you never have enough time.
No, and I like that, because I think that, you can always make excuses as to why now is not the right time, and whether it's, hey, I'm just, I don't have the right education, or I'm getting starting a family, or I'm getting married, or I'm farther in my career and I don't want to change it, or I don't have the money. There's always reasons why you won't. But every time people get into it, I'd say the number one answer we get, with people is they say what they would tell entrepreneurs if they could is get started early, get started now, because you'll very seldom look back and regret getting going now, but oftentimes you'll wish you just got started earlier. So I love that as a takeaway.
Absolutely.
Well, as we start to wrap up the podcast, if people are wanting to reach out to you, they're wanting to know more, they're wanting to, they want to be, or have you invest in them, they want to be a customer, their client, they want to be an employee, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out, find out more?
Just like you, Devin, I give out my personal number. It's 978-597-8900, and my email. Very simple. RHT, those are my initials, at acwg.co. Very simple email. rht@acwg.co.
Well, awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out. And just as a reminder, people, we are going to talk for just a couple minutes with the bonus question after the normal episode about intellectual property. And we'll hear your number one intellectual property question. But as we wrap up, if you for the normal episode, thank you again for coming on. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell, love to have you on the podcast and share your journey. Just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. 2 more things as a listener. One is if you in your podcast player, make sure to click subscribe so you know when all of our awesome episodes come out. And 2, make sure to leave us a review so new people can find out about us. Last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else, go to strategymeeting.com, sign up, and grab some time with us to chat and strategize. So now as we wrap up the normal episode, now we get to go on to a bit of the bonus question where we get to flip the tables a bit, and you get to ask, you get to ask me questions. I normally, during the normal episode, always get asked the questions, and you get to tell me more about your journey, and now we get to flip that a bit. So with that, I turn it over to you. What is your number one intellectual property question?
I got a patent back in 1997, and shortly thereafter, I think it was maybe 4 years, it expired. Is that right? Is that how long they last?
Not unless you maybe didn't, depending on when you had maintenance fees due, it's possible. So Normally, and I'll give you the normal answer, then you give a couple caveats. Normally, when you do a patent application, you get 20 years from the date of filing. So in other words, from the day that you filed your application, you get 20 years before it expires. Now, there are a few maintenance fees that you have to pay in different increments along the way in order to keep that patent application active and going. So, you have them at every few year increment, and they get progressively more expensive. And the way the government basically sets it up is, hey, if this is an important patent to you, you're willing to pay more, fees in order to keep it active for that full 20 years. If if you get into it and you're saying, hey, we're no longer using it, no longer valuable, it's no longer worth enforcing, then you can let it go abandoned. So probably where you got into it was after you went through the examination for a period of time, you hit one of those first maintenance fees periods. You didn't pay the maintenance fee, and therefore it went abandoned.
Yeah, and then about a year later, I started getting photographs sent to me from Eastern Europe of my splatterless urinal all over Eastern Europe, and I didn't make a dime on it.
Well, that is always a trade-off. You can get a patent, and if you can do it, it's worthwhile. And yet, there's also that cost and that trade-off of how you maintain it, how you keep it active, and what makes sense. So,
but back then, it was just a whim. I was working full time, full bore at the Wall Street firm. That was my total passion at the time. The patent was just kind of a whim, and then somebody sent me a picture of my toilet over there, and it's like, wait a second, how did that happen? And that's how it happened.
Yeah, I definitely understand. It's one of those that you can look back and, hey, if only I kept it active, if I could have been, I could have enforced it or got license from it or anything else. And yet, on the other hand, you could, if nobody had ever done it or they hadn't knocked it off, you're saying, hey, I paid all these fees, I never did anything with it, and it doesn't make sense either. So
yeah,
always a crystal ball, and you have to decide which path you want to take.
Well, that totally makes sense now, the way the government does it, ratcheting up the fees so that you have to decide whether you think it's important or not.
Yep, exactly.
Anyway, it's in the public domain.
All right. Well, that was a great question. It was fun to chat a little bit about intellectual property. Appreciate you again coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. And if you or anybody of the listeners ever have any other questions about intellectual property, feel free to go to strategymeeting.com. And otherwise, I wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Hey, thanks very much. I know where I'm going to go for my IP law, Devin. Thanks a lot.
Sure thing.